So I work on Bahrain, the Gulf, the Middle East, and North Africa mainly in my work, and we cover a lot of different issues like generally the human rights violations, the issue of enforced disappearances, the repression on women's rights, the targeting of human rights defenders in civil society. And I think one of the biggest problems we have right now is the shutting down of civil society space, because once you no longer have NGOs, once you no longer have human rights defenders working in these countries, then who's going to actually be talking about all of the other issues that are happening? Who's going to be documenting it and paying attention to it and making sure that the world knows about it? And so I think that this is going to be a crucial issue in the next couple of years, especially in the countries where civil society space no longer exists, unfortunately. So I think, when it comes to women's rights and religion, I'm a big supporter of the separation of, church and state, or mosque and state, or whatever you call it. I think that there are fundamental rights that have to be protected. And those, of course, include women's rights. I think you cannot separate women's rights from human rights. If you don't have women's rights, then you don't have human rights. And so I think that that's the number one objective, is to make sure that these fundamental rights are preserved. And that should be regardless of what religion is in place. The challenge with religion is that nobody's going to agree on what religion actually says on these different issues. Everyone has a different interpretation. Even within the same sect, within the same religion, people have different interpretations of what different verses or different rules mean, right? And so that's why you do need, a foundation of fundamental laws and rights that are protected regardless of what religion is in power at that time.
What kind of rights are you talking about?
I'm talking about, everything from civil, political, and economical rights. So the right to be able to work, the right to, be protected, the right to freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, the right to, freedom of... basically all of the rights that are mentioned in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And I think that right now, as we progress internationally, we're going to have to build more rights as we move along, because now, for example, we're moving into the digital world. And I think there needs to be an assessment of how to include tech rights, or digital rights into the Universal Declaration, because I think that's becoming more and more important, especially because it's becoming a space where people are being targeted. And so that's going to be, I think, a part of the rights that need to become fundamental. I'm Danish as well as I am Bahraini, and I grew up in Denmark, and I know that in Scandinavia we pride on the issue of how far we've come with equality, on issues of equality, gender equality, and fighting for women's rights and so on. And I think that's great. It's something that I'm very proud of as a Dane. But at the same time, we have a huge double standard when it comes to upholding those values and principles to people that we do business with. Whether it's in Norway, Sweden, or Denmark, all of these governments do business with Saudi Arabia. We all do business, with countries like Bahrain or the UAE and so on, where there is modern-day slavery, especially of domestic workers, many of whom are women. And so it seems that we only apply the issue of, equality and women's rights when it comes to our own people. And suddenly, when it's supposed to be about, women in places like the Gulf, it's not as important anymore. And I think that's a huge problem. We need to start asking questions about where do our principles and values lie, and are we willing to do business with just about anyone, regardless of where our principles and values are.